Hey, how's it going, everyone? Before we get into this next episode, I want to give a quick shout out to a continued supporter of the podcast, being Seth Roy of North Mountain Goshawks. And for those of you that are looking for a new hunting partner for next season, don't hesitate to get on the list. He makes great game hawks, particularly parent-reared Finnish, North American, and Russian goshawks. So if you're wanting one of those types of birds especially, hit him up at ostringer3@gmail.com. Fill out the form at northmountaingoshawks.com, or you can just send him a message on Facebook via North Mountain Goshawks. Makes great birds. Don't hesitate to get on that list. Tell him we sent you. And by the time you hear this, the first couple of exclusive content episodes will have been made available to members that signed up for the Extras membership via my Buy Me a Coffee account. And if you want to get in on that and continue hearing more of the Falconry Folly series, as well as the series based on ratting, then you can sign up. It's only $10 a month. Go to the Would You Like to Support link on my website and sign up there, and we'd love to have you. And also, just to make you aware, the new online store on the website is also available. So if you want to pick up a t-shirt, a coffee mug, or whatever suits your fancy, then just head to the website also, click on the store link, and get you some new Falconry Chronicles merch. Really appreciate your support. And now, on to this next episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast.
Eagle trapping is the muskie fishing of the raptor trapping world. And, for those who aren't familiar with muskie fishing, it's called the fish of 10,000 casts. You can fish all day long for 4 days in a row and not get a single bite, and you're still doing everything right. And you put in all the hours, and then all of a sudden there's a bite and you got a fish. And that's how eagle trapping goes. So, and it can be pretty frustrating to begin with, when you sit there and trap and watch for days after days and maybe not even see birds. And then all of a sudden, you're surrounded with birds and catch two in one afternoon, like we did after 16 days of nothing.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Chronicles podcast. And our guest for this episode, Jason Reid, I've known him for quite a few years now. He's been a pretty well-traveled guy, has lived in multiple states, and currently resides in Wyoming. And I had a chance to catch up with him last year at the NAFA meet and record this episode. I wanted to get it recorded because he's one of the guys that's kind of known for helping people trap eagles when they get the appropriate permits and all that. And I hadn't really had a chance to talk much in depth with anyone about the eagle trapping process and what all goes into that. And so I thought it would be good to do that while we were both in the same place at the same time. And I also just hadn't had Jason on the podcast yet in general to talk about his history in falconry. So anyway, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it, and hope you enjoy this conversation with Jason Reid. Here we go. Yeah, so you were asking me about how audio works in like a hotel room like this. Basically, it's hit and miss. Some hotel rooms are really echoey, and I have to work a little bit more magic on the back end to try and get it out. My favorite thing is whenever sometimes you're recording in a hotel room, like in, I don't know, mid-morning or something or whatever, all of a sudden housekeeping will decide they need to start working right outside your door, and there's vacuum cleaners and banging around and doors slamming and stuff, and you're just like, So to answer your question, it's not my studio, and it's not like a more secluded setup where I know it's going to be quiet all the time, but we have to do what we have to do, so.
At least it gets the job done.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so it's one of those things where sacrifices kind of have to be made to get things done. But speaking of that, thanks for doing this at 8 in the morning.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where, yeah, unfortunately, sometimes certain days line up to where I don't have a whole lot going on, and then everybody else only available on a certain day. So then I got to do one day and then pack 4 in the next. And it looks like this is going to be one of those days. So did you, I can't remember, did you say you really had much else lined up for the day?
Not today.
Yeah.
It's going to be really windy this afternoon. So
Have you been trying to get out with anybody, or?
Haven't yet.
Yeah. I don't think that's in the cards for me this year either.
Right.
Yeah. So what have you mainly been doing when you've been here?
So far, we've just been working in the vendor room and taking a nap and talking to people. We put on the Eagle Workshop yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Now, how was that?
Not too bad. It was fairly well attended. We had about 20 people there, and of course ran 15 minutes overtime. And
how does that work?
It was okay.
Yeah. Not used to talking to a group of people.
Right. The Q&A is what always tends to run overtime at the end.
Yeah.
You think you cover everything, and then, everybody has different questions, and away we go. And
mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the Q&A stuff, I know, like the times that I've done some like presentations or whatever, you eventually, one of the funniest ones that I can remember is like, so when we were doing one for a scout group once, my one buddy who's not known well, like for his patience, and you know of him too, I think, but I'll tell you more about that later. But there was this one little kid that just kept raising his hand and asking like question after question after question. My buddy was like ready to wrap it up, and and it's just like sometimes it's hard not to be like, okay, what now, but no, I mean, people been pretty receptive to the workshop then for the most part.
Yeah, the Eagle Falconry has such a tremendous amount of interest associated with it, especially here in North America, where Eagle Falconry is still very much in its infancy. And so everybody wants to learn about it. And, being America, bigger is better, right?
Well, yeah, I think it depends on your mindset. But, I mean, as far as that kind of stuff goes, I mean, I know that we've already had several different podcasts that have kind of briefly touched on, some of the different like current status with like where Eagle Falconry is here in the States and everything. But like, I know part of the reason why you ended up out west was partially for that, right? Was,
that's
to some
right.
degree.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, so out of curiosity, like, what extra hoops did you have to personally jump through, whenever you moved out west to kind of start getting more into that world?
It was quite involved. Well, number one, obviously picking up and actually moving out to the middle of, the western areas.
Nowhere.
Central Wyoming.
Yeah. So middle of nowhere.
Yep. Middle of nowhere. Mm-hmm. And, had to have, the income and livelihood to accommodate that and everything else. And then, on the other side of it is, I have personally found, the majority of practicing Eagle Falconers to be quite receptive to newcomers. Not everyone seems to feel that they have that experience, but I've been, well received by the Eagle Falconry community as a newcomer. Put in a lot of effort. And the one thing that I did that helped, I think, really get started was just volunteering to help. Joining, the International Eagle Ostrichers Association. I got involved in the eagle rehab world, which was, the falconry conditioning of the rehab birds. And just, doing what I could, as little as, even just arranging, the monthly Zoom meetings for 3 or 4 guys who were flying eagles, rehab eagles, to, collaborate and troubleshoot each month. And that, just even a small something like that to start giving back before I expected to take, and learning all I could as I went is absolutely, the thing that helped get me here where I am this fast.
So, I mean, out of curiosity, with this small group that has been kind of, I don't know, accumulated over time, I mean, what is, to your best knowledge now, I mean, the number of people that are active Eagle Falconers or Eagle Ostrichers, I should say. Right. Well, what are the active number of Eagle Ostrichers here in the U.S. now? I mean, I know it's not that many.
Yeah, and that depends on how you would define active.
Right.
So those who I'll break it down into a couple of different camps here real quick. So in the one camp, you have the folks who actually fly and regularly take game with their eagles. In that camp, there's maybe 15. And then there's a number of folks who, have eagles and do regularly take them out and fly them, but don't necessarily avidly pursue the hunting aspect as strongly as some of the more well-known falconers do. Mm-hmm. And there's 30 of them, probably about double. And then, the rest of the eagles that we're aware of that are possessed on falconry permits anyway in the United States are, not necessarily regularly flown, or they're retired, or they may have had injuries that, prevent them from being as regularly flown as before at this point. And our best guess is, because, we don't have all of that data, maybe 50 or 60.
I didn't think it was near that many.
I know, right? It's a little bit more than you see. Yeah. Eagle Austringers tend to be quite a secretive bunch, as much so as Accipiter Goshawk. Yeah, well, and the thing is, though, is like I think that even like the Goshawk guys, though, you know, though, that through different forms of like social media and just activity that, I mean, the Goshawk guys don't near as hide what they do. You know what I mean? Like, right. There's a lot of those guys that don't shy away from any kind of like, hey, I fly Goshawk, but there's definitely a lot more, I think, of that group for sure. But, and that especially it's known, but yeah, you're right. I mean, they must be a much more secretive group in that regard because, or at least not necessarily secretive, but just not, broadcasting what they do. And I kind of understand that to a degree because I know with our current legislative state and everything with, how hard it is to, acquire a golden eagle right now and everything else that, I can understand why people want to try and maybe keep on the DL a little bit more with the activity, with that. But yeah, and there's a couple, several different factors that go into that. It's, the regulatory issues. It's just something a lot of folks don't know about eagles and Fish and Wildlife Service in the United States. The same infraction that you would commit with a red-tailed hawk and get a slap on the wrist for, get your bird confiscated and a $10,000 fine when you do the same thing with a golden eagle. Mm-hmm. They're far, far stricter with eagles. So, it's much more important to stay completely legal and not attract too much attention because as soon as you get the public involved, or, too many people around all the time and accidents happen, you never know. Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that there's a little bit more of a reticence there. Yeah, to want to kind of attract, more of a public eye with that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, no, I get it. And, until things get a little bit more, I don't want to say stabilized, but a little bit more like normalized, I think, with that kind of thing. I understand, the hesitancy for sure. But because so like over in Europe where, eagle falconry has been practiced for, hundreds of years now, and they've got, access to birds and everything else. And if the United States is still somewhat in its infancy regarding golden eagles, Europe has basically graduated from college at this point. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of folks over there who know what they're doing, and, it's a lot more public, and it doesn't have quite the same stigma associated with it. Stigma is not really the right word, but, just trying to keep it on the down low and not attract the attention. Yeah. And the other factor is eagles take so much dedication that they also tend to be flown by folks who are already retired, perhaps. Older gentlemen, usually is kind of the demographic that tends to gravitate toward eagles. And a lot of them, they're not on social media, not posting a lot of pictures or anything like that. And you just don't hear about it.
Yeah. Have those guys already had their rotator cuffs and shoulders replaced at some point? Like,
I've talked to 3 people in the last day that have had shoulder surgery.
Oh my God. I couldn't imagine like being, and I've made this comment before, and, I can't imagine getting into this sport period at like an older age, and let alone deciding to fly a huge bird like a golden eagle at, a retirement age, man. That would be interesting. Yeah. You'd almost have to go ahead and just get a horse and, split your, your arm up there and have like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know if that's ever going to be in the cards for me, but it does seem somewhat appealing. I don't know if I'd probably have to do it before I was like retirement age though.
Right. And that's, the other thing that we're working towards, with the rehab side of things, trying to normalize using, falconers to condition failed fledged golden eagles for release. Here in the States, it takes, so much work to actually get drawn, by the time you even get to the field to be able to trap a bird and then, trap one and hunt and fly with it, and then discover that you actually don't like it and the bird is too heavy or the bird doesn't like you and everything that can go wrong. Flying a rehab bird, for where you get it for 1 or 2 years and then you have to release it, whether you want to or not, is actually about 2 out of 3 people, I would say, who fly a rehab eagle, fly one and never fly another one.
I can understand why, probably. But I think that brings up a really good point, though, that I think that's a fantastic idea, really. I mean, how can you better get like the best of both worlds in that regard? Like, you can find out real quick if it's for you, and whether, like you said, you want to or not, you go into it already knowing that this bird is only going to be a short-term, commitment. And, God forbid one of those things doesn't like you, Right. And,
then there's pros and cons on both sides of the coin there. I did it that way because I wanted to have experience with the eagles before I actually trap my own bird, so I can make some mistakes on the birds that I know that are going to get released anyway. But then on the converse side, there's a handful of folks who, won't touch a rehab bird and fly them that way and, go trap your own eagle first. And they have a point, because a freshly trapped passage bird is going to be the easiest one to work with. The rehab birds, they can come with a lot of baggage and bad habits or been half imprinted or who knows what and cause a lot of problems. But so I get it, but I am on the side of the fence that I would like to see more people fly a rehab eagle even before they put their name in for the lottery to see if it's for them.
Well, and so then that brings up the next question of, how hard is it for someone to, get into that then? As far as just if they want to rehab an eagle and get their hands on one that way and see if it's for them, do you have to jump through all the same hoops to get to that point, or?
No, actually. In fact, you don't. You don't even need the eagle endorsement on the permit. If you're a master class falconer, you can condition a golden eagle for a rehab facility. The hardest part of that is getting, because you have to get the partnership between the rehab facility and the falconer, get a handshake between there, and then the agreement and moving the bird back and forth, and getting it done. But there's a lot of opportunity. There's some supply chain issues of getting all those proper connections made, but there are actually more eagles than we can find falconers to fly them.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Well, I'm sure, like you said, though, the hardest part probably is forming that relationship to get a facility to, in their eyes, vet you well enough to,
Right.
To trust you with that particular task, though, right?
Right. Yeah, because of the golden eagle being the charismatic bird that it is, it's the pinnacle for the rehab facility as well as it is for, flying for falconry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's nothing that brings in quite the amount of PR, and stuff that,
right.
If you have a red tail, one person holding a red tail and one person holding the golden eagle over here, where the crowd's going to gravitate towards, as far as the attention and the wow factor. So yeah, I can imagine that would be a little bit more, of a stickler, because they're going to then have to turn the bird over that they're potentially using to, for education and for public awareness and things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of it, we kind of, we encourage people to, reach out, ask questions. I think some folks are a little hesitant to be too pushy or, really want to dive in. But on the other hand side, there's been talk of possibly forming an official sponsor apprenticeship program for golden eagles.
Just for eagles?
Just for eagles. So you would have to actually get an active practicing eagle falconer to agree to sponsor you before you can get your eagle endorsement. And there's just a handful of folks who would really like to advocate for that and change that. Personally, I'm for less regulation is better, but I really like the idea. And if we can voluntarily, try to follow that type of a program, that would be really, really good. So if you would look to apprenticing yourself to an experienced falconer in the eagle world, the same as you did when you got into falconry to begin with, you'll be good off, and just like you probably bugged the heck out of your sponsor, you may need to bug the heck out of some eagle falconers to get some attention.
Well, and I think what you said at the very beginning of this conversation to some degree, though, of, you, for example, made yourself very useful in different applications to try and let people know that you were serious about doing the things that you're wanting to do. And if certain people are willing to do that, like you said, a bird like that is not, it's not going to be the same as just keeping a red tail or a Harris hawk or something like that. So it's one of those things where I think that I'm like you. I don't really necessarily like more regulation, but I think that kind of thing could be one of those things that could be more easily regulated within the community from our own standards, from perspective, falconer to other falconers and stuff. Though I do agree, though, that that's going to be probably the best recipe for success for the future moving forward for it.
Right. Yep, for sure. And there's dozens of different ways to get involved and get started and be useful, and just even like the trapping program or coming out west, walking fields to document depredation and all of those things. If one wants to travel, if one doesn't really want to travel at the time, doing like I did, because I couldn't really spend a whole lot of time out west when I got involved. I was still living back east. And, administrative things, just anything can help. Yeah.
Well, and also if someone's willing to make the trip out west X amount of times to, do, some of those things, and, someone like a prospective, sort of like, specific sponsor in that regard sees that, well, it's like, well, they're already making the trip out west to help with this, whatever that means. They can also make the trips out west then to specifically hunt jackrabbits with an eagle and this, that, and the other. At least it's a potential thing that they can look and be an extra vetting, type of thing for something like that. But yeah, I do see your point also on the other hand of if you make it to where that's official, like regulation and stuff, though, that's going to be an extra major hamstringing type of deal where, it's going to really, severely limit the amount of people that can feasibly do it off the bat. Not necessarily maybe in a positive way, though.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, I don't know. That seems like an interesting bit of gray area that I'll be interested to see how that works out, for everybody involved. Is that something that's mainly just being talked about within, the particular, Eagle Austringer club right now, or is that just something that's...
Yeah, it's just a subject that's been brought up, on occasion, but there's no real push for it at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. Just a way to kind of brainstorm.
Yeah, brainstorming a lot of ideas.
Yeah, cool. Well, and let's go back a little bit then to kind of your personal, journey with all of this, because, you were originally from the Midwest as well, right?
Right.
Yeah, and go ahead and just speak a little bit about, kind of your journey and getting into falconry and where you used to live, and then kind of, a little bit more what made you decide to saunter out west then.
Yeah, my quick elevator pitch story is I grew up most of my life in Iowa, and I was an avid reader. And so I, of course, found My Side of the Mountain books. And there was another book called Gifts of an Eagle that was authored by Kent Durden back in the 1950s. And I read that book. I got that from the public library back when we used to go to libraries. And I really, really liked it. It was a story about a guy who, got a golden eagle, flew it, caught stuff with it. And, I thought, I really would like to do that. I was, 8, maybe 9, probably. And my dad was a hunter, so I grew up in a hunting family and mostly big game. And so I was involved with, getting out in the field and learning some field craft, and came across in the hunting regulations that we had for our state that you write to the Game and Fish Department for falconry regulations. Oh, and I discovered this. I was about 10. I can write them and get these regulations, and I can learn how to do that from them. This was so cool. So I wrote a letter, put a stamp on it, sent it, and 10 days later, I get this packet in the mail. And it has, the older, before it all got changed, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service was taking care of falconry permits. And I read through there, and I said, you have to be 18 to be a general falconer and get a peregrine. And then you had to be I think it was 23 before you could become a master class falconer for the Eagles. And I was absolutely devastated at 10. It's 18 may as well be forever. My life is just done. I don't know what I'm going to do. Anyway, then we attended a convention on the Mississippi River for viewing bald eagles. And a falconer was there with a Harris hawk. And I talked to him very, very briefly, and it was all water under the bridge from there. My family, we moved around quite a bit when I was, still at home. And so I didn't actually end up, we kind of bounced around a little bit. And then in Iowa at age 20, I finally trapped my first red tail.
Yeah, and as far as the different aspect of things, from there, did you, once you kind of were able to start getting into it and, start flying your first bird and then kind of go, how many more times did you move around, after that and before, in between that and where you are now?
I had to take the time and sit here and count them all up. It would take a bit. Right quick off the top of my head, I would say close to a dozen.
Good Lord.
Yep. So I've lived in numerous states. Maine was the furthest away. I was in Maine for 3 years.
Jeez,
and then, yeah. So I actually initially got into falconry for golden eagles.
Mm-hmm.
That was my target species, but then saw, that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. And then, through moving around, and then, then we ended up, in the state you're from.
Mm-hmm.
And then we actually bounced over to Ohio there for a while. I was going to move straight out west from Indiana, but We didn't have quite enough money saved up for a down payment on a house yet, because that was the time where the real estate prices were skyrocketing.
Yikes. Yeah.
So we stayed there until we could get the place that we wanted, and then bought it and moved out west for mostly all the hunting opportunity that it provides.
Yeah, and if I remember right, when I first started intermittently, talking with you, I think one of the first things that, because I bought some of your equipment, I think it was some of your braided jesses or something way back in the day, all way back in the day, all like 8 years ago or something.
Right.
Anyway, but like, I think at that time you were still living, I think you might have been in Ohio at that point.
Could be.
I can't really remember, but anyway, like, because we were talking about flying kestrels and stuff at that point, and that kind of stuff. Because I know you had done that at one point too, and but I mean, as far as like all this moving around and stuff, I mean, do you really think that hindered you much in your falconry pursuits at the time? I mean, moving around a lot like that, or do you think you learned just as much as opposed to just having like the negatives associated with that?
Right. It was a little bit of both, I would say. I definitely met a lot of people and learned a lot from all the different areas. But then I'm also the type of person that I don't enjoy training birds so much as I enjoy just getting in the field with a made bird. Mm-hmm. And so, moving and having, different types of fields, different types of quarry to fly in, and, kind of having to relearn how to do it, every, 3 years was that hindered a little.
Yeah, I could see where that would be just a smidge frustrating, just a little bit. Well, and then like you have to find all new areas to fly, new fields, and each new time you move, I'm sure there was probably some degree of like, okay, I don't want to necessarily piss off the falconers that are already here. How do I go about approaching that right? And everything else. Because I know for me and for our group and stuff, that's it's a big deal. You want to be ethical about, utilizing, it's like, what can I do to make, my access to some of your spots okay, and is it even okay to begin with? I mean, whatever. And, do you mind if I come out with you? I'm more than happy to help you beat if, whatever this, that, and the other, earn my way into it, so to speak. So, I mean, how did you go about like, a lot of the approaches with that too? I mean, how much research did you have to do before you moved to each spot, to see who lived in those areas beforehand?
Yeah, I didn't do too much of that because, usually the reason for the move kind of dictated where we ended up going. But still, it's, if you get out and, knock on doors, in some states at least, or look up back in some of the days, I'd, get the old plat book and look up landowners and stuff like that and drive around and scout. And there's enough land out there, I think, for all of us if we put in the work to find it. But yeah, and then living where I am in Wyoming now, we're quite fortunate as we have a big backyard and no other falconer anywhere really close, probably 40 miles.
Yeah. I mean, I've driven through, kind of about where you're at right now. And because, I mean, as you know, I've worked out in Wyoming a couple times on hospital contracts and stuff. It was more the southwestern part of the state. But yeah, I mean, in most parts of Wyoming, I think if you, you couldn't you fly a small plane and accidentally crash it into somebody else's property before you even remotely find somebody else in some of those areas or something. There's definitely a lot of distance between people in that state. I'm pretty sure it's still the most sparsely populated state to this point, isn't it?
It is. And there's definitely a reason. Because if you don't hunt, fish, or hike, there's not much else to do.
Yep. Well, and the thing I've noticed too about Wyoming the couple times that I was there was you have to be really careful about where you live and want to fly also, because like I know where I was at, there's like really only 2 good solid months of quote unquote summer. and then like the rest of the time it's so cold and so windy, 40 to 60 mile winds all the time. And
right, we happen to be fortunate enough to live right in the shadow of one of the smaller mountain ranges, and it creates a microclimate in there. We have very little wind for about 30-mile radius around where we live. So that makes it really nice, but the temperatures do get cold.
I can understand the temperatures getting cold, but as far as the wind, I didn't even know that existed in Wyoming. I didn't even know there was a place in Wyoming that didn't have like 40 to 60 mile per hour winds. That's hilarious. No, that's, I mean, so do you see yourself staying there then?
I do.
Yeah,
I do. And part of the reason for flying eagles there, most of the folks who've, come to Wyoming and, places like that to fly their birds, you're flying in the first 30 minutes of daylight or the last 15 minutes of the day to try to avoid the eagles. Mm-hmm. If you just fly one, then you don't have to worry about what time of day you fly.
Yeah, there is that. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of those guys that definitely lose their really nice falcons to Goldens, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know. Like I said, it sounds like you've had a really interesting journey. Yeah, I don't envy it. I mean,
it's been quite a trek.
Yeah. I mean, out of all the other states that you lived in, though, what was your other favorite place to hawk? I mean, was there a different particular state that if you had to choose like a second, best that you would think about living in again as far as your own personal falconry goes? Or
if I had to choose a state that wasn't a Western state, mm-hmm. I would probably go back to Maine.
Really?
Because it's I don't like the heat, so summertime's not really my thing. And Maine is difficult. It's a very difficult place to fly a bird, but it can definitely be done. And there's ducks available on the salt marshes for long winging and snowshoe hares for short wings. And it can be difficult, but good.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've heard some good things about Maine, and I mean, it seems like a really beautiful state too. I have a license to practice in Maine. I was thinking about taking an assignment up there at one point, but it didn't end up happening. But yeah, I mean, there's the outside appeal of it. I mean, it looks really nice.
Right, and it is. But it's the eastern version of Wyoming in being cold, windy, sparsely populated, and not much to do if you don't hunt, fish, hike, or there because you've got the ocean boat. Right.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. That's all interesting stuff. Yeah, I just, like I said, I don't know if I'm going to get much of a chance to live in. I mean, that's been one of, I guess, the silver linings for me over the last few years, having like worked in like 7 different states the last, 3 years is, you get to see a lot of what you think you might like, but you also get to see a lot like what you definitely don't want to. So,
right. You can try a bunch of different stuff out and see what you like and see what you don't. Yeah. Save a lot of time actually that way and headache.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, as far as, some of your more like memorable experiences and everything, I mean, was there a particular, I mean, this is probably a loaded question, but of all the states that you have hawked in and stuff, I mean, what's one of your more, memorable, hunting stories or experiences that, I mean, which state do you think you made the most, I mean, aside from Wyoming where you're at now, I mean, which state do you think you've made the most fond memories hawking in?
That would have definitely been Iowa.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, where I spent the most time there. I had the most land access and, was there through, as game populations go up and down, was there through a couple of the upsides, when it's good. And yeah, and as most folks probably have, the best was done with a red tail. she got really dialed in and I flew her for pretty hard for 3 years, and our second and third year, yeah, she got really good.
Was it predominantly on rabbits, or was it squirrels also? Or?
She took a few squirrels, but yeah, mostly cottontails.
Yeah. Did you ever get much into the long-winged world? Did you ever live anywhere where you were able to get much into that world at all?
I actually did. I had a captive breeding operation for about 10 years, and I didn't raise a lot of birds, but a few anatoms, mostly anatom peregrines, a couple of Gyr peregrine hybrids. And I produced the birds for, as far as I'm aware, was one of the last reintroduction projects in South Dakota.
Interesting.
It was done, I don't even remember what year that was, 2000s.
Okay. Yeah.
So I flew peregrines and hunted with red tails and goshawks.
I gotcha. I noticed the subtle and very important distinction there.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the distinction you made earlier with the eagles, and some that there's the numbers of the ones that actively really hunt and versus the ones that fly and everything. I caught that. I saw what you did there.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. Well, so as far as some of those memories, though, specifically with some of your hunting stories, I mean, what's one of the more memorable hunting stories or experiences that comes to mind? I know for most people, it's hard to think of just one, but oftentimes there's usually one that always sticks out as being like one of the more memorable ones.
Yeah, when you ask that, the first one that definitely pops into mind was the third season with that particular red tail. And at that point in time, I had decided to just push the limits of her weight up as far as I could. And so it was January, and she wasn't a big bird, just an average size. I usually flew her between 40 and 42, and she was trapped at 38 ounces. And so this particular day, she was pushing 48. So she was almost 10 ounces over her trap weight in her third season. And so I took her out, and we were beating the brush and actually caught 2 cottontails, had them in the bag. And then our neighbor showed up to do some work on his food plots with a tractor. And we were hunting down on that end of the property, and he come pulling in with this big rattling trailer.
Yeah.
And that bird took off. She flew about a half a mile back into the timber, and I couldn't get her back. Not to save my life could I get that bird back. And I'm like, okay, we've definitely reached the upper end here. I ended up stomping through the brush and catching number 3 to get her back an hour later.
Yeah, I think, you definitely pushed the limit there. Yeah, see, for a minute there, I thought that story was going to take another turn.
Yeah.
I thought, well, this was going to be like another smorgasbord opportunity for the bird, because I thought that maybe the story was going to go towards like, okay, got his tractor out and started, mowing some stuff down, started squirting some more rabbits out. And it was just going to be like, just left and right, even more, bunnies in the bag. But no, that would make more sense, being a little bit more skittish and,
she
see you
took
later.
off being too fat.
That's hilarious. Yeah, we all have those moments. Well, luckily you kicked up that third rabbit, though.
Right. She'd have probably ended up staying out overnight if it wouldn't have been for kicking up that third rabbit.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you, the other best case scenario would have been if she'd let you get close enough and you could have just, tossed out, what we commonly refer to as old Frosty.
Right. Yep.
And getting her back that way or something. But, as far as like specifically though with the eagles, what's been one of your more memorable like eagle experiences and stuff?
The most memorable eagle experience was definitely catching the first jackrabbit was number 1. Mm-hmm. Number 2 was actually going and picking up the first one. Picking her up and getting her in the truck and settled and home and, all that.
Yeah. How was the first jackrabbit flight?
Very short, very simple, and not much to see. It flushed about 5 yards out, and it basically slipped in the snow, and it was
game over.
10-yard flight, and wham. She pitched up a little bit, and then kind of flipped over and pounded it, but it was pretty short and simple.
Oh, that's funny. Well, yeah, I mean they can't all be. I mean the experience itself was memorable. As far as the flights, they can't all be super spectacular. But that's funny. Well. And before we kind of start to close up a little bit, though, I know before we started, I was kind of running by you that, it would be kind of nice to learn a little bit more. And I know we've kind of circled back a little bit here in the conversation, but I was going to find out more from you specifically about, kind of what the process is like, trapping, these golden eagles and stuff. I mean, of course, you don't have to go into super specific details about all of it, but I have always been kind of interested to learn more about, some of the techniques that are involved, because whether it be video or in person or whatever, I mean, personally, I've never gotten a chance to see a golden eagle trapped. So I'm not really that familiar myself with a lot of the tools of the trade and some of the methods that are used with that. So if you're willing, talk a little bit about that, and then we can come close to closing this out.
Sure. There's not a lot of video or photos. There's a lot of photos of the traps, and then there's a lot of photos of eagles coming that have already been taken off the traps. But getting any footage or anything of the birds actually being trapped and how the whole process works is pretty rare, because we're so excited and focused on what we're doing, nobody thinks to film it. But yeah, so the main thing with trapping eagles is, and it's so different from, trapping any other type of raptor. I like to make the comparison between road trapping red tails with a BC is comparable to, fishing a farm pond for bluegills. For most of us, there's some areas where you can, drive for 500 miles and not find a red tail. But for most of us, you drive 10 miles, evaluate the bird, drive another 10 miles, evaluate the next bird. You toss the trap out 2 or 3 times in an afternoon pretty easily. Eagle trapping is the musky fishing of the raptor trapping world. And, for those who aren't familiar with musky fishing, it's called the fish of 10,000 casts. You can fish all day long for 4 days in a row and not get a single bite, and you're still doing everything right. And you put in all the hours, and then all of a sudden there's a bite and you got to fish. And that's how eagle trapping goes. So, and it can be pretty frustrating to begin with, when you sit there and, trap and watch for days after days and maybe not even see birds. And then all of a sudden, you're surrounded with birds and catch 2 in one afternoon, like we did after 16 days of nothing.
Yeah, that's got to be frustrating. Yeah, no, I can understand that would be an ultimate exercise, in patience from that regard. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that I can understand then why, that's something that you just have to have that much more extra time, effort, and energy into wanting to do and making sure it can even happen in the first place. I mean, there's not very many people that can just say, okay, I'm going to take a month off and risk maybe not even trapping a bird.
Right. Yep. And it can be very resource intensive. And it can, I would have to recommend if anyone that got drawn and was actually trapping a bird, I plan on a minimum of 2 weeks. Now you go less than that and you're definitely cutting your chances quite a bit.
Ooh. Yeah. No, that's that's an important piece of information, I think, that people need to know for sure, though. And so, what's the next level of the process then, as far as...
Yeah, and then the next level of the process is 2 weeks, definitely a 4-wheel drive vehicle. Mm-hmm. You're trapping areas, that are difficult to get in and out of. And then, there's all kinds of different traps. I generally tell everybody, every kind of trap works some of the time. and nothing works all the time. So
it's pretty much the Anchorman quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
60% of the time it works every time.
Yep, exactly.
That's hilarious. No, well, yeah. So describe some of the techniques with that then.
Well, we divided up into two different types of traps. The portable traps, which is like the BC, Balchatri, and the hoop or fly trap are the two that we use for that. We've played around with ideas of harnesses, like a pigeon harness version for a rabbit type of thing, but we haven't actually really tested that out much. And then we have the stationary traps, which use dead bait. So the portable traps use live bait, the stationary traps use dead bait. And so for the stationary traps, we're primarily noose carpets and bow nets. And when we say a noose carpet in eagle trapping, it's not the type that you would stake down over a pigeon that a bird has killed for it to come back to and get caught. Our noose carpets are actually buried in the ground, either beside or right underneath, a dead jackrabbit or a dead lamb or, something that you've bumped the eagle off of on occasion. And we actually bury it so that just the nooses stick up out of the dirt. Because eagles are so savvy and smart, if there's too much wire sticking up and something just doesn't look natural, they just won't come. Much more so than I've seen with, smaller birds. So we just have to try to have the nooses sticking out of the ground, so that when the birds almost always land about 5 or 6 feet short of the bait, and then walk up to it to feed at some point, and then they get their toes caught in the nooses. And it's pretty simple and straightforward. And then the bow net is the same way. The best bow net setup, like some of the banding stations, where they're trapping with, the traditional lure pole and the pigeon and stuff like that, they do on occasion catch golden eagles that way. We've tried that with absolutely no success. So the way we use a bow net is hide it really well. You have to try to make the set look as natural as possible, and then use a dead lamb or jackrabbit in the center of it, and then just back up as far as we possibly can, and still see clearly with the spotting scope for when the bird puts its head down, and use a remote control trigger. Mm-hmm. And then the portable traps that we use. Now, again, when you're using the portable traps, you have, with the BC, you have the wire cage and all of that stuff. And we've actually had that discussion here in the last couple of days, that the best age class of golden eagle to trap is not a hatch year bird, and not even a 1-year-old bird, but a 2, 3, or 4-year-old bird is ideal. And using the BC might have a tendency to be a little bit more selective towards younger birds. More naive, and they don't grow up as fast. So you can be trapping a 1-year-old bird, and it's actually the equivalent of, well, let me put it this way. So if an eagle takes 5 years to mature, a 2-year-old bird is the equivalent of, say, a red tail trapped in October. A hatch year bird is the equivalent of a red tail trapped in its natal nest area in August. A 3-year-old bird is more like a November, December red tail. And then a 4-year-old bird is more like an end of year, maybe January red tail. So for those who have experience in trapping red tails and flying the various age groups, early September trapped red tail is a very different bird from a December trapped red tail. So the December trapped red tail will be a lot more, they tend to be quite a bit more independent. They have more flying experience, and you can tell when you start training the bird.
Sure.
And the same thing actually happens with the eagles, except it's a little bit longer.
A lot more pronounced.
Yeah. So if you're trapping a 1 to 2-year-old bird, then, a 1 to 2-year-old bird is basically almost still dependent on its parents. for food and hasn't hunted or anything. So get back to what I was saying, the wire type traps, the portable traps, the BC in particular seems to catch more of the younger age class birds. And then the hoop trap, or phi trap as it's also known, with a small rabbit in the middle. Of course, it's just a big version of it, almost 3 feet in diameter. And that works really well. That actually does catch mature birds as well. So it definitely catches a wider age range of birds more likely.
Yeah, and I can see why that traditional BC or whatever was just something, and that would, or kind of like it would attract more of those inexperienced birds because they're just looking for something to eat, not necessarily hunting, but like they see something dead and opportunistic kind of thing. This is a next meal as opposed to it makes sense. Yeah, well, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, is there anything more that you can really think of to add, or do you think that's just a pretty good general like kind of broad overview for that?
Yeah, it's a pretty good general broad overview. It's not really so complicated. It's just you got to keep 3 things in mind. Number one, it can take a lot of time. Yeah, such as putting out a BC, or a trap for an eagle. As long as the bird is still there, you should be waiting 6 to 8 hours, for that bird to come down. Whereas usually with smaller bird trapping, by the time you've sat there for an hour, that bird's it's not coming down. So waiting, 6 to 8 hours, possibly, spending days before birds come into baits, especially if the weather's a little bit warmer and they're not quite as hungry. So keeping the time factor in mind, keeping your bait or trap sites as naturally looking as possible, because they're quite savvy, so they will shy off of unnatural, even freshly dug dirt. They'll shy off of, unless it's in a prairie dog town, and then it looks natural. So that helps out. And yeah,
it's a little bit more intensive than just tossing a BC out of the roadside for a red tail.
It is.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. No, I mean that's kind of what I was looking for that, because I knew nothing about any of that before this conversation, really, for the most part. Very, very small little bits, but that, for me, that satiates a lot of my own personal curiosity of it, because it's one thing just to kind of, envision what this might be like. But being able to set all this stuff up efficiently and probably even semi-quickly in such an open area and such, that sounds very challenging.
Right. It is. And I don't even have, comparatively speaking, I'm sure I have at this point now quite a bit more experience trapping eagles than most people have. But compared to a handful of people who have been trapping since the 70s, I have almost no experience at all. And even they, learn something new every year in trapping eagles. A couple of them are actually up well over 500 birds. And there's always something new to learn, something new to try.
Yeah. It seems like just the kind of the microcosm of it all is that, or I guess you could even say macrocosm of it all in that way, is that basically, like, even the experiences involved is kind of like everything just seems so much more pronounced, and there's a lot more longevity as far as the kind of like what you were explaining, that it just takes so much longer to do everything with eagles.
It does.
It seems like
it really does. Everything is longer.
Wow. Now that's definitely an exercise in patience that, in and of itself, I completely have even more understanding now of why people want to make sure that people are a lot more invested, initially coming into it than with other stuff.
It's a lot more, it's hard to convey how much dedication it actually takes.
Yeah.
So it's something when you don't know exactly how much dedication it takes, it's easy to fail at.
Yeah, for sure. Just the fact that you have to take, you really need to take, 2 weeks even just to even remotely think about acquiring a bird, if that's the route you want to go. That's just, yeah. I mean, like I said, though, that's a big reason why I like doing this stuff, because I learned something, and this is the kind of stuff that more people need to know. And I mean, like I said, we've been able to touch on a lot of these things, you know, with some of the previous talks, like, you know, with the podcast with Lauren that we did and stuff. And you know, I mean, it's nice to be able to talk to other people, though, with similar experience. And yeah, I mean, I knew that that's what you had been doing for a while out west. And, you know, whenever people do get drawn and you know, helping out with that kind of thing, you know, so, I mean, it's cool that you're willing to do that too, by the way. You know, I mean, that's a lot of time, effort, and energy on your part, you know, to even help people with that too. So commend you for that also.
Yeah, it is. I appreciate that. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, and, you know, even to just, you know, get some of the relationships with some of the people out there to even be able to, you know, to do that on different, you know, people's land and stuff like that too. I'm sure there's a lot of work that goes into that also.
A lot of the rancher relations and all of that. And yeah, they're living in Wyoming, and I'm trying to do my part to keep everything going, to, you know, not only, you know, get my own birds. Of course, that's, you know, one of the top goals. I'd like to get my own eagle one of these days, which will happen. But yeah, giving back to the sport and seeing it continue is pretty important as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, it sounds like, well, you know, over the years here, you might end up getting a couple more if you're lucky. There's as much time, effort, and energy that goes into all this stuff. I mean, good Lord, man, that's just a lot of work. It just sounds like so much work.
It is. And, you know, you don't want to be, I think, someone said yesterday, you know, you don't want to be a wet towel about it, but yeah, it's just, we kind of got to keep hammering home just how much work it is. And then, you know, like I said before, you know, flying a rehab bird or really getting out in the field, especially with someone who is, you know, getting a newer eagle started, so you can see the whole process. Because it's easy to go out with, you know, someone who has a good made bird that's catching plenty of game, and they make it look a lot easier at that point than it actually is to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and yeah, because you're seeing a snapshot in that that macrocosm, so to speak, of just time, effort, and energy that went into that person's, you know, like time and investment up to that point. Yeah, I mean, you can't appreciate all the things, you know, to get to that point because you didn't see it. You didn't have to experience it yourself. So
right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. No, this has been really informative. I appreciate you, you know, going into depth a little bit more about some of that stuff. And you know, you've already given some good advice, especially when it pertains to the eagle stuff in particular. But I mean, do you have any other piece of advice or anything you'd like to leave to, you know, current and future generations of falconers? And you know, if you do, we can get that from you real quick, and then we can probably wrap this up.
Yeah, I would say it's the number one thing, especially specifically as it relates to eagles, but I think it really does relate to, you know, all falconry and all forms of falconry. I am for, you know, there are certain things in life that should be more important than falconry. I mean, that's just me. You know, family is, you know, one of those things. But there's a lot of things that you can do to make both work. And sometimes just, you know, persistence in putting the thought and dedication and energy into, you know, what you want to do is pretty important. And so I like to try to use my passion for falconry to actually bleed over, you know, into the rest of my life, and keep, you know, because when you do you and you're happy, everybody else around you is happier as well. So there's that balance between, you know, family, other obligations. So, because like I said, I'm not the one. There are some things that I do believe, you know, should be more important than falconry to a degree. But don't be using that as an excuse to, not do it right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of people, I think, that do have, it's all about prioritization. And if you can't prioritize certain things, some people have an issue being able to do that, and I think those are the people that oftentimes end up not sticking with it, and probably rightfully so and understandably so.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't devote the time, effort, and energy, and you can't prioritize, this over a lot of aspects of your life, I mean, sure, I agree. Family is always going to be most important. And that's a fault that we have sometimes as Falconers too, is sometimes inevitably there's always those times.
Right. And there's always something. And for me, it's kind of like one of the, so you can, whatever situation we're in, there's probably somebody who's in a worse situation. Mm-hmm. So there's the two different types of Falconers. There's the Falconers who, are in a situation where they feel they can't make it work. And if you can't, for sure, then don't. But there's probably, if you're really passionate about it, there's probably another Falconer somewhere in your exact same situation that's making it work and doing it well.
Sure.
Figure it out.
Yeah. And every once in a while, like I said, there's going to be times where we have little lapses where even sometimes it overtakes even some of the family stuff just because of whatever circumstance. And, we have to live with those things, but sometimes they happen. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, you have to figure out a way to make it work. I mean, regardless. And you also need to have people in your life that are willing to compromise with all of that too.
Right. Right. Yep. And having the right people in your life is pretty important.
Yeah. Thanks for being willing to do this like short notice, and 8:00 in the morning isn't always the best time for people, but it sounds like you're probably a little bit of a early riser like me. So
yeah, if you consider this, for those who consider this early, yeah, it is kind of a little bit, but yeah. Glad to be here. Hopefully I had something valuable to add, and it was fun.
Yeah. Hopefully this wasn't too painful of an experience for you, and like I said, I appreciate your input, and I appreciate you, like I said, being willing to share some of that other stuff. And, I mean, like I said, that's one of the reasons why I enjoy continuing to do this. I always learn something new too, to some degree. And man, this has been fun, and hopefully you have a nice, productive rest of your week, because you're selling stuff here and everything also. And for people that might need some nice equipment, how can they get a hold of you?
The best way is on my website, which is HawkeyeFalconrySupply.com. Mm-hmm. Mostly braided gear and hoods.
Yeah, and this guy does make some good hoods. For all the folks out there listening, he makes some good braided equipment and some good hoods for sure. So, I would recommend checking him out as well. He makes some good stuff. So, but anyway, thanks again, man. We can go ahead and call this good and get on with the rest of the day and see what else we get into, I guess.
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right. Thanks a lot, bud.